So something important just happened between Ghana and Zambia, and many people may treat this as a simple travel news, but this decision actually touches one of Africa's deepest historical problems. Now, Ghana and Zambia have officially agreed to visa-free travel between their citizens, and this is great news. So this means Zambians can travel to Ghana without applying for a visa, and the Ghanaians can do the same when traveling to Zambia. So on the surface, this sounds like convenience, of course it is, but when you step back and look at the African history, this is actually a geopolitical shift that goes far beyond travel. Borders separating African countries today were never designed to help Africans cooperate economically. They were designed during colonial rule to help European powers control territory and extract resources. From railways to roads, the trade routes, all these were built to move minerals and goods out of Africa and not to connect African countries to each other. And even after independence, many of those structures remain unchanged. So that is one of the reasons Africa trades less with itself than any other continent in the world.
Africa will be better when it's more organized within itself. We're the continent that does the least trade with itself. That's a crime. And the leaders of this continent now recognize that.
When movement becomes difficult, business slows down. When movement becomes easier, economic relationships naturally grow. Now, this is one of the major reasons why regions like Europe develop strong international trade networks. Free movement allows businesses, workers, and investors to operate across multiple countries as one connected market. Currently, Africa trades less than 20% of its goods within the continent. That means most African countries still rely heavily on exporting raw materials to markets outside Africa. So this is not because Africa lacks potential. It is because African economies are still operating separately instead of a combined continental market. And sometimes it's easier for an African company to export products to Europe than to sell those same products in another African country. And visa restrictions are mainly part of the problem, because when you look at some of the traders, say for example, from Zambia, just to go to the neighboring country like Malawi, you'll be faced with a lot of visa issues, visa restrictions, particularly when you're trading or trying to sell another product from one country to another. So this is the reason why people have to understand that all of these things were designed on purpose to make African countries not to cooperate with each other, and visa restrictions are part of the problem. Relationship between Ghana and Zambia carries a strong Pan-African history. What has happened between Ghana and Zambia is not just something that has happened out of the blue, because if you look at the relationship between Ghana and Zambia, it carries a very strong Pan-African history. The Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, and Zambia's founding president, Kenneth Kaunda, believed Africa's independence would only succeed if African nations worked together economically and politically. So this visa-free agreement is small but meaningful step towards that original vision. It shows two African countries choosing cooperation over isolation. So the world is changing quickly. Foreign aid is becoming less reliable. Global powers are competing heavily for African minerals and markets. And when African countries operate individually, they negotiate from weaker positions. When African countries integrate their economies and policies, they increase their global bargaining power. So visa-free movement sends a signal that African nations are willing to remove internal barriers that have slowed cooperation for decades. And so this is something big. This is big news. This is something that is welcome. And we hope to see a lot of other African nations do the same. Now, if you look at the Sahel region, this is something that Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have adopted. Most of the African countries within the ECOWAS region have abolished the visas. So there's a visa-free travel. And what that does is that it opens up all the trade routes. It opens up the relations. It improves relations. And this is great for the continent of Africa. Now, most of these borders still exist until today, and most of them in most of the regions only just exist on the maps and on paper. But in reality, what is currently happening is most of these countries have abolished these visas, and there is much more fluidity between the countries moving in terms of trade, and this is something that is encouraging to see. Visa-free travel alone will not solve Africa's economic challenges. There's still a lot to be done. From infrastructure still needs improvement. If you look at the transport networks, the road still needs to be done, and the railways still needs to be done. All these issues need to expand. The trade regulations must become more aligned. But historically, economic integration begins with mobility. And that is why this abolition of the visas between Zambia and Ghana is unprecedented and is a very welcome move, because when people move easily, trade usually follows. And when trade grows, investment increases. Over time, strong economic partnerships can lead to larger continental financial systems and shared development projects. So for over a century, Africa's borders have often separated economies that naturally belong together. These borders were created for colonial control and not for African prosperity. So if you look at Ghana and Zambia have now taken a small but significant step towards reversing that legacy. So this visa-free travel may look like a simple diplomatic agreement, but it raises a very powerful question for the entire continent. What could Africa achieve if Africans were truly allowed to trade freely with each other? Because Africa's greatest economic opportunity may not be outside the continent, it may be within Africa itself. So if this conversation matters to you, drop your thoughts in the comments. Which African borders do you believe should open next? Because the future of this continent may depend on how easily Africans can connect, trade, and build with each other. So until next time, we'll see you. My name is NB. This is War We Are Reclaiming.